What a fine display of chaos and disgust. So Friday night, we finally got around to tearing apart our mystery pole barn find 3D3. And we did it live, and we'll put a link to that in the description in case you want to watch it. But, you know, it's not as bad as I thought it could be. It's not as good as I was hoping, but I think we can save that. And the goal with this is to save this engine, replace just the parts that are absolutely destroyed, put it back together again the way it was when it last hit the road back in the 1980s, and just play around with it. We'll stick it in a Belvedere and play around with it. So I'll give you guys the quick rundown, the history of this thing in case you missed it all. A few months ago, I bought this off my buddy John. This was the original engine in a 71 Roadrunner that he's doing a Hellcat swap on. So he got the car and had been parked for decades. He got the car, pulled out all the old drivetrain, and laid it out in a pole barn. Everything from the crankshaft flange back was nuked. The transmission was broken in half. The drive shaft was ripped in half. The rear axle housing was bent. Complete and utter destruction, everything el kabam. But the motor looked okay. So make a long story short, it sat there and it sat there and it sat there. And then I needed some of the brackets and trinkets, pulleys and whatnot that were sitting on the front of it. So I bought the engine from them, figuring I'll take what I need, we'll tear it down. It's probably junk, and you know, I'll just scrap it if it is. Well, I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, it is the perfect time capsule. It's the perfect late 1970s, early 1980s street machine, like day 2 muscle car time capsule. If there's any way I can save this thing and get it running, I want to do that. So that's the mission. And the first step was tearing it apart, seeing what we have. I'm going to get into all of that. I'm going to show you what we've got. I'll give you our plans moving forward, but I also want to get into some 3D3 Mopar deep dive stuff and a little controversy. So let's start with the 3D3, the basic deep dive stuff. This is a 1971 3D3 HP motor. So it was rated at, we're going to get some controversial stuff in a minute. It was rated at 8.5 to 1 compression and 300 horsepower. Previous incarnations were rated at 335 and 330 horsepower. The compression ratio was dropped for 1971, and that's what they attribute the lower power numbers to. So let's do some identification on it first, and then we'll get into the details. Identification. So let's look at what makes this thing what it is. How do I identify it as a 1971 3D3 HP motor, aside from the fact that we know that it came out of a Roadrunner? So the first thing is, on the driver's side right here, you've got a casting date, and this has got an April 1970 casting date, which would be consistent with a 71 production car. Not really important, but it's got the oil pressure setting switch for a Raleigh gauge cluster, which a Roadrunner would have, 71 Roadrunner would have. On this side, we've got all of your 1969 and newer big blocks have this flat pad right here, and this is where the last digits of the car's VIN number are stamped into. So this confirms it's from his car. And then you've got this information pad. So on a tall deck motor, a 413, 426, 440, you've got a pad right here. On a low deck motor, you've got the pad right here. And here we've got it stamped 3D3, and then down here, HP. So now, the thing about this pad, the thing about this information pad, if you're looking at a bare 3D3 block, so you're at a swap meet, you're in somebody's garage, and you're looking at a bare block to buy, try not to buy one that doesn't have information stamped in that pad. Why? The information stamped on the pad really means nothing if you're going to build the engine. But if the information, if these stampings are missing, that means that the block was decked. And if the block was decked, that's the first thing that disappears is all of the stampings here. If the block was decked, you don't know what it was decked to or for, or what they were trying to correct. And so now you've got an engine that you don't know what you've got when you go to put it back together again. I've had blocks that were machined on certain angles to compensate for cylinder heads and all sorts of other things, you can find some real weirdness. So if you're looking for a low deck Chrysler, 361, 383, 400, and that pad is blank, I would avoid it unless you know the exact history and the exact, how all of the parts that came with it. All right. So that's how we identify this as a 1971 383 HP motor. Now, what does HP motor mean? Depending on the year and the application, compression ratios, camshaft profiles change. They're different. But all of your Chrysler engines stamped HP came with certain hardware. Now, there's stuff that goes around the engine, like the exhaust and the cooling system. But for the engine itself, starting from the bottom, all of your HP motors are going to have a windage tray, like that one. They're going to have a higher volume oil pump. They're going to have valve springs that have a damper, so it's a dual spring or a single spring with a damper. They're all going to have some form of high performance intake system. The vast majority of them are 4 barrels, some of them are 6 packs, some of them are dual quads, but that's basically what HP means as far as that goes. I said the exhaust manifolds, right? Yeah. So it doesn't mean that the block is special or the crank is special or anything like that. It just means that it had there was a certain grouping of bits and pieces that went with the package, and that's what the HP means. All right, so let's talk about this block, what we found on it, not just the block, but the rest of the engine. And we'll get into some controversy. So the controversy first. All right. 1968, 1969, 383 HP engines were rated at 10.25 to 1 compression ratio. 1970, they dropped the compression ratio to 9.5 to 1. 1971, which this engine is, they dropped the compression ratio to a theoretical 8.5 to 1. So, here's where we get some weirdnesses. Right. The piston height it's the blueprint piston height for a 1968, 1969 383 HP motor, the 10 to 1 compression engine, is 20 thousandths above deck. There's a positive deck height. All right. 1970, they lowered the compression ratio to 9.5 to 1. And they used the same flat top type of piston on that engine, but they changed the pin height to drop the piston 30 something down the hole. So the blueprint spec for a 1970 383 HP motor would have a flat top piston that was approximately 10 thousandths below deck. Now, your numbers may vary because these are blueprint specs. The mass production machining means that you're going to have all different combinations at all different heights, and it's rare to find one that fits the blueprint spec. But nevertheless, those are the actual numbers for it. Now, here's the interesting part. 1971, they dropped the compression ratio to 8.5 to 1 for the 383 HP motor, and they dropped the horsepower rating down to 300 horse. But they use the same flat top type of piston that they do in the 1970 engine. 8.5 to 1 383s, or the lower compression 383s, 2-barrel engines, have a dished piston. But these are flat tops with that 8.5 to 1 compression ratio. Well, how does that work out? All right, so here's what I've determined. This is the second one of these 71 383 HP motors I've torn apart, and it's the second time I've come across this. And it's because of the head gaskets. All right, so let's look at these. All of your 1970 and back 383s and 1971 383 2-barrels used a steel shim head gasket like this. So these things compress down to approximately 20 thousandths of an inch thick. This is the second 1971 383 HP motor I've torn apart that came with a composite head gasket. And that, by the color and everything, you recognize that as a Fel-Pro composite gasket. But here is a regular production Fel-Pro composite gasket. And you're going to see a couple of differences right off the bat. First, the color, right? You see that this one is a much darker blue than this one. But also notice that this head gasket has these holes right here. Now these holes, these are water passages that don't appear on the 3D3. Here. So you see, right there. Now those holes do appear on 400s, on 440s, on 426 Hemis. Engines built post 1971, so 1972 for the 400. But those other engines, the 440 and the Hemi, they go way back. So this is a factory steel shim Hemi gasket, and here's these holes. And here's the aftermarket Felpro, the universal one for the wedge motors, and there's those holes. And here is a composite head gasket, a Felpro composite head gasket that has no holes, which means that the only engine that this head gasket could fit properly would be a 1971 3D3. Because again, when it went to 1972, the 400, they added those holes, and those holes are on all 440s. So what I believe happened was they used the same flat top piston as the 1970 3D3, but they dropped the compression by using a thicker head gasket. The Felpro, okay, the factory, the steel shim head gasket compresses to 20 thousandths of an inch. The composite Felpro approximately 42 thousandths of an inch. So I think that the compression drop from 70 to 71 wasn't due to pistons, it was due to head gaskets. Now also they changed the cylinder head. They went from the 906 heads from the 1970 back to the 346s, which are these, and these are the original heads off of this engine. And these have the same combustion chambers as the 906s, the only difference being, the same combustion chambers, the same port, the same everything, the only difference being hardened seats. So, now these are the heads we pulled off the engine. I'll get to those in a second. Trivia, right? Just crazy Mopar trivia. We're sick people. Mopar people, we're sick. There's something wrong with us. All right, so let's talk about now what we found with the block. All right, some water got in some of the cylinders. All of the cylinders that we could see have some surface rusting. This part of the block stayed completely dry, and no water ever got its way down into the bottom end of it. So that's all good. And the lifter bores are perfect. The lifters just slid out of here like, just like butter. They just slipped out perfectly. Cam bearings and everything that we can see, everything looks perfect. It's all pristine. We dropped one of the main caps, the number 3 main. Bearing was perfect. Still had oil on it. Everything looks good there. So the only issue we have right now with the short block, before we can go any further, is we have to free this thing up. Now the goal here is to try to rebuild this thing, or not even rebuild it, just put it back together and fix what's drastically wrong with it and put it back together, changing as few parts as possible from the package that we got. So we know that the pistons that are up in the bore are protecting the cylinder wall. So we know that this cylinder wall is going to be good, this one's going to be good. This is just light surface rust, that'll hone right out. This is light surface, this will hone right out. Protected bore, mostly protected bore. This one got some water in it, but it's mostly just surface rust. This is our only problem cylinder. You can see there's a lot of flaky rust down here. We got a little bit of pitting there, and then we got a lot of pitting up here. You could hear my finger as I. So this may or may not hone out. If we have to have the cylinder overboard 5 or 10 thousandths of an inch, we can still reuse the stock size piston just with oversized rings. So the plan right now is to mix up some automatic transmission fluid and acetone, clean this out really good, sand down the walls, and then let the engine set, let the cylinder set with that ATF acetone mix for a few days, and then we'll try to break this thing free. I don't want to damage the pistons. I don't mind if I got to hurt the rings. No big deal, we'll throw a fresh set of rings in it. But I don't want to hurt the ring lands in the pistons or do anything like that. So we're going to be patient with this. We'll soak it, and then we'll break it free. And we'll do a whole video on that when we get to that point. Now, like I said, everything at the back of this engine was destroyed, transmission back. The only possibilities we may find with this is possibly a bent rod. You know, you see, I don't know when the trauma happened, how it happened, but we might find a bent rod or two. We could find a bent or cracked crankshaft. We won't know until we can free it up and get all of those bits out of there. Either way, it's not that big of a deal. These crankshafts are like a dime a dozen. I have plenty of rods, and the rods are easy to come by. There's nothing exotic or crazy. But we'll have to actually closely inspect those parts once we can break it apart. So that'll be the next phase. All right. So during the live, we pulled the heads off, and I grabbed the caliper real quick, and I checked the bore. And just because it was just a lot of activity, I just looked at it real quick and I says, oh, it's like a 30 over motor. It's not. I actually cleaned the bore and did a careful check on it, and it's 4 1/4. So this engine's never been overboard. Yeah. It's a nice piece, and it barely has any ridge on it at all. So actually, I can't catch my fingernail on it. So this motor probably only had 60 or 70,000 original miles on it. Just barely broken in, right? The heads, saving the heads is no problem. We may have to put a couple of guides in. You see these exhaust valves are just stuck in place. So we may have to, a couple of guides, but other than that, these things will clean up. And I think Dr. Art wants to do these heads. So we'll let him pick them up and work his Dr. Art magic on them. We're not going to port them and go crazy. Just clean it up. Because again, I want to put this thing back together again and have it run the way it did back in the day. All right. So the rest of this stuff. The engine sat, before John even bought it, this thing sat apart for decades in somebody's barn. And the valve cover was off of this side, and you can see the filth that accumulated there. But the valve cover was on this side, and you can see how nice these pieces are. So just give you an idea of the overall condition of the engine. And it's all going to go back together again with the stock rockers and stock push rods and all of that. It came with this Mallory Unilite ignition, and this is a 1971 only big block Chrysler distributor. It's got this retard unit on the vacuum advance canister, so we'll reuse this. The Mallory Unilite. Now here's the thing: I can't easily get this rotor off, and I don't know if we can get a replacement. So I got to play with it. I got to be careful with this. But you can see these slots. That's where the optic eye in the pickup, that's where it gets its signal from. So these were the original electronic ignition conversion setups. These were introduced around 1974 or 1975. And these things were fantastic. They were like bulletproof. So I'm going to clean that one up, take it apart, clean it up really good, and we'll test it out, of course. But I want to reuse that. Great ignition systems. And we'll reuse that distributor too. Maybe we'll throw a curve in it. I don't know. Now, let's talk about the cam and the rest of the package. Because again, I want to put this together. I want to get it running the way it was. And there are some compromises. So this is the intake manifold that was on it. Nice big giant YN single plane intake. Great piece. But the camshaft. So that night, Friday night, we pulled the camshaft out of it, and we're looking at numbers. So the first thing I looked at was wear pattern. Just took a quick look at the wear pattern, and I was like, perfect wear pattern on these things. And all of the lifters, the lifters are in order. I have to just package them so that they don't change. There's the front of the engine, there's the back of the engine. All of the lifters look great, and the wear patterns on the cam look great. So I was like, let's try to save this thing. Is it the stock cam? Is it aftermarket? What's the deal with this? So, looking at the numbers real quick, and I don't know if you can see this or not. It's a crane cam, and there's some numbers in there. So while we were tearing the motor down, we started looking for, looking the numbers up. And we got a whole bunch of different responses. And all of them were like, oh, that's a really good cam. That's 284 degree duration. It's a 580 lift. It's got, it's on a 110 center line. All sorts of numbers started coming back, right? And I'm like, yes, that's very cool. That's awesome. And then I tried to look up the numbers myself, and I realized that these numbers are barely legible. They're etched in places. A couple that are stamped in, and that's the basic blank. But the actual spec of the cam is etched in, and you can't make out any numbers except 284. So I go, okay, fine. So I find an old crane catalog online, and I identified as many of those numbers as I could, and I'm going through it. And then I found that this cam is actually a replacement, a stock replacement for a 1968, 1969 383 HP motor. So it's like 440, 460 as far as lift goes. It's got like no real duration. It's on a 115. So it's a really mild cam. It's the stock 68, 69 Roadrunner cam. So they're gonna have a little bit of a mixed match with componentry because, and I double checked it. I whipped out the calipers, started measuring lobes, plugging numbers into my calculator, and yeah, no, it's a stock 383 HP cam. So what we have there is we have an intake manifold that's not going to really start working until around 3,000, 3,500 RPM, and we have a cam that's going to just say, see ya at about 5,500. So this engine is going to have a very short, punchy power band. I'm not worried about it. We're not looking for big numbers. I just want a representative of that era to play around with and see what it does. If we try to maximize this thing at all, I don't think we're going to change the cam. I think we'll change the intake manifold. We'll probably go like a Performer, just a small Performer dual plane intake manifold, and it'll better match the characteristics of this cam. So that's where we're at with this thing. There's a lot of cleaning of parts. There's a lot of sorting and organizing. It's not bad. It's not terrible. I think that we can meet the goal. I think we'll be able to save the pistons, and I think with some fresh gaskets and some fresh rings, the bearings look beautiful inside the engine. So from what we can see so far. And we moved the rods. All of the rods are able to move back and forth on the journal, so there's nothing seized or spun or weird in there. Everything seems as it should. So I think we'll be able to meet our goal of putting this thing together and getting it running with just minimal parts replacement and a lot of effort, a lot of cleaning, and a lot of, but that's just part of it. So that's it. Tune in next time when we take our previously soaked, it'll be soaked in the future. We take our soaked short block, break it free, tear it down, and do the inspection on all of that. Inspection and possibly reassembly right away. It just depends on what it all looks like. All right, guys, that's it. I hope you have fun with that. Go watch the live. The live was fun. We had Dr. Art and Buff Del Campo and Kim from Kim Fixes Things. They were here, and everybody dug in, and everybody got dirty. So see you tomorrow.